Chapter 50. Alden had asked about the demons because he had been wondering if the big one that had made the trails in the grass, or others like it, might work differently than the bug types. The grasshopper demons didn't respond to stimuli and they didn't seem to eat. If other types were attracted to loud noises or they were more intelligent and capable of seeking prey, that was something Alden needed to know for plans 2 and 3. Plan 1 had just become Plan 1 thanks to Kibby's explanation of chaos potential. Alden had maybe possessed high potential as a child, according to Hannah's theory about why her bubble spell wouldn't work quite right on him. Apparently he no longer did, according to Kibby's assurance that high chaos individuals would demonize very quickly when they encountered corruption. Thanks, system. But also, and maybe more so, thanks, Gorgon. Being double stabilized was even better than he'd thought on that first day, while he was dodging around the bugs. Plan 1 now seemed a little more viable than the other options. Alden, why are you cooking all my favorite foods? Kibby sat at the kitchen table, completely bundled up in the lab coat with the deep hood pulled so low over her face that he couldn't see anything but her chin. Because we're going to be spending every single minute we can in the vault from now on, and we won't have the kitchen anymore. Alden smashed a bean burger into a pan full of oil with the back of a wooden spatula. That was about 10% of the reason. They'd already been eating mostly from the stores in the vault. Alden was just scared that one or both of them were about to die way faster than they otherwise would, and cooking a last meal seemed like the thing you were supposed to do in that situation. I have a secret, he said, pressing the button on the blender box to puree a bunch of thunder lettuce. It's a secret nobody knows about except for me and one other friend. And the system. But the system wasn't really somebody. Are you going to tell it to me? Kibby asked. I am. She hopped out of the chair. I'll get the ink, she said eagerly. Alden rolled his eyes. No. No contract tattoos. The day after she first spotted his, she had disappeared into Joe's old rooms and reappeared shortly afterward with magic ink and brushes. Periodically, she still tried to come up with reasons for them to use it on each other. Alden understood she wanted to look like a real wizard, but he was too much of a human to go along with it. But it's the best way to keep an important secret. She protested. Nobody will be able to take it from me even under torture. The coat was so long on her that it was puddling on the floor. Melty Mini Reaper, thought Alden. One who needs to watch happier television. Listen, he said, pouring the puree into a bowl, if someone threatens to torture you, you should absolutely tell them my secret. You should tell them anything and everything they want to know about me. You should even lie to them and tell them I'm a horrible human who forced you to teach him magic against your will. That might be something you would get in trouble for. I don't really know how people will feel about it. Never. I doubt it's going to come up. Since nobody knows my secret, they don't even know to ask you about it. As long as you don't bring it up yourself, it'll be fine. She didn't move to sit back down. He sighed. Fine. I promise when you're older and you want to make your first contract, you can summon me, and we can get tattoos together. Really? I swear. On our faces, she said immediately. If it's going on our faces then I get to pick the entire design. And the size. Yes. She trotted back over to her chair. My secret is that I'm a little different from other human avowed. Because you can feel your authority, said Kibby. Because I am your instructor. Alden dumped some of the canned meat she liked onto a plate. That too. I really am stacking up the abnormalities, aren't I? But even before I met you, I was different. I have a friend who gave me something. I don't know what to call it. It's a magic thing, and I think it makes me. There's a way for authority to be more stable and tougher, right? Without necessarily being larger in amount? And maybe that's part of what gives a person lower potential for chaos. There is higher quality authority. There is also higher attachment and higher control over it, said Kibby, shoving back her hood to look at Alden with interest. Most people get better in that way when they practice a lot. But some people start out better than others. I thought you were like that? I don't think so. He set their small feast on the table and sat down across from her. Your friend gave you a good gift. Yes. I'm going to try to share it with you, but don't get excited. It might not work. I don't know how my friend did it, so I don't know if I even can." She looked very excited. "You're going to want to eat all of your meat," Alden said. "Eat until you're full. And then we'll try it." She started shoveling food into her mouth. "I'm going to eat my own meal at a normal speed," Alden told her dryly. "So there's no point in you racing through yours." Kibby swallowed. "Do you have to do a hard spell on me? Is that how it works?" "No. It's a little." Alden tried to think of a way to tell her without it sounding disturbing, but there just wasn't one. "I'm going to drink some of your blood. If you don't mind." Alden felt like a normal response to someone telling you he wanted to drink your blood was, "You. Ick. Get away from me." He should have known by now that Artonans were built a little different. A lifetime ago, he'd watched Gelnor's assistants peel loads of magical dead things for her so that she could merrily braid their skins into a bracelet. Kibby's reaction to his request was extreme enthusiasm combined with a desire to ritualize the event so that it would be even more like something out of a documentary about murder cults. She shuffled around the kitchen in the robe, examining all the dishes critically, trying to find exactly the right vessel for the mystical experience they were about to have together. Alden stared at her from his seat at the table, trying not to touch the logograms she had painted all over it. The few he could read said things like, "Great power" and "delicious." He cleared his throat. "Kibby, you heard me about the no more meat situation, right?" "Yes. I am not a carnivore, so why does it matter?" She pushed aside a tall glass and reached for a ceramic bowl with gold paint on the rim. "And you were paying attention when I told you I hear voices in my head?" She bounced. "I will be like a natural prophet of the ancient times." "I don't think so," Alden muttered. "Unless the voices they heard were very hard to understand and get along with. Also, this might not work at all." "I will fill this with my blood for you," she said proudly, holding out the chosen bowl. No. That thing is huge. I was going to ask you to poke your finger and bleed onto a cracker or something. I'm sure that will be enough. You can't mix my blood with other ingredients." Alden stared at her. Her expression was so offended. "But Gorgon got to use salsa." "All right," he said slowly. "You can use the bowl. But you can only put a little bit of blood in it." She marched over with the bowl and a sharp knife and set them in front of him. Then she started shoving up the sleeves of the lab coat to bare her arms. "One finger." Alden grabbed the knife. "Or I'll just eat a piece of your hair, and we'll see if that works." Pouting a little, Kibby gave him her right thumb. "Maybe we should chill it first? So it doesn't hurt as much. We could take something out of the fridge." She reached over and jabbed the pad of her thumb against the knife's point. She held it over the bowl. "How many drops?" she asked. "3? I'm sure it needs to be more than that. I'm not a very strong wizard." "Yet," said Alden. She smiled. "3 is fine," he added. "I've already done 12. "How? Was she bleeding fast on purpose?" 12 is a good number. Let's stop there." He took the bowl away and made her wrap her finger with a bandage he'd brought from one of the lab's first aid kits. Then he made her sit on the floor, just in case she was going to faint from whatever was going to happen. He would have, too, but someone had to sit at the decorated table, or all her hard work would go to waste. "Why do you look nervous?" Kibby asked. "Because I don't know what will happen. Are you ready?" "Yes." Alden wished she'd look away so he could sneakily take the single drop on a cracker root, but she was staring at him avidly. "Idiot. Just lick the blood out of the special bowl before you chicken out." He closed his eyes and did it. It tasted a lot like his own blood, though it was unexpectedly acidic. He set the bowl back down. His pulse was racing as he met Kibby's eyes. He could tell she was holding her breath. He was, too. Nothing's happening. It had always been a possibility. He thought it was even the most likely one. Just because Gorgon could do some arcane thing with an exchange of blood didn't mean Alden could, too. It's alright if nothing happens. We just move on to plan 2. Dimensions away, In the Artonan Consulate building in Chicago, Illinois, a gray hand froze as it was reaching out to lock the front doors for the night. "Oh my," said Gordon, in a language nobody on the planet could have understood. "I wasn't expecting this." Chapter 51. "Kibby, I'm so sorry," Alden said, staring down into her wide brown eyes. "I told you it might not work." "Don't worry. I have a lot of other plans." She was frozen in place, waiting for a magic Alden apparently couldn't produce. "Kibby, your Artonan is vastly improved." It was Alden's turn to freeze. It definitely wasn't Kibby. She was still sitting on the floor by his chair, unblinking. And that high, strange speech with the undertone of breaking glass. He slowly turned in the direction the voice had come from and saw a familiar gray alien with black eyes staring right at him. "Gordon," he breathed. And then, a moment later, he was out of his chair and, "We're hugging? That's new." "Gordon!" shouted Alden. "Are you here? Are you real?" "I am real," he said, squirming away from Alden, who had to force himself to let go. "But I am only here, if by here you mean projected across dimensions into Alden's mind through an uncontrollable urge to provide guidance to my spiritual progeny. Hello. I am shocked you are still alive." "I am so happy to see you," Alden gasped. "Even if it's just in my head." Gordon held up a hand. "Wait. Time is extremely limited. This feature of myself isn't one I am accustomed to. It's supposed to be triggered in my death cave shortly after you have feasted on my corpse." "What?" The alien was leaning around Alden to examine the kitchen with interest. "I was never a fan of the life sacrifice tradition, so I skipped it. I'm much older and more powerful than I should be. I thought I could probably get away with transferring some of the benefits of my inheritance to you without the bother of dying and being eaten. Clearly, I was more successful than I intended." He was staring at Kibby. "You can talk without restrictions," Alden said. He was still so busy processing his shock at the fact that he was speaking to Gordon at all, he was surprised he'd even realized. Gordon smiled at his wrists. "Yes. No bindings in the mind space. It's been decades. I'd like to spend the next few minutes relishing in even this false freedom, but wasting the entirety of your first ride for that seems too blasphemous. Even for me. Even if you've chosen to perform it for an Artonan." "This is Kibby," Alden said in a rush. "I want to protect her. I can tell. Things like that are very obvious in this place if you know what you're doing. Come here quickly." He walked over to Kibby and crouched down. Alden followed and knelt beside him. After staring into the little girl's eyes for a moment, Gordon said, "This is going to be a disappointing first experience for you. I'm not what you think. And this doesn't work at all like you're hoping it will. I wanted to share whatever you did to me with her. It made me. I think it made my authority less susceptible to corruption." "It did. But you can't pass it on," Gordon said in a matter-of-fact voice. "You're too young. Too weak. Too alive. You don't initiate that process in this way. Drinking the successor's blood is the second to last step in the inheritance, not the first. And you're carrying an altered version of the gift anyway. You're incomplete." He looked back at Kibby. "She's exhausted," he noted, running a gray finger idly over the demon-damaged sleeve of the lab coat. "It's due to a chaos storm? We're trapped on Munthagund. More like a gentle chaos breeze then. But I'm surprised you somehow ended up in one. Though I am loath to admit it, most wizards wouldn't throw inexperienced humans, B ranks, or rabbits into such an environment. It's too wasteful. You have bad luck." He examined Alden's face and then made an annoyed click with his forked tongue. "Never mind. You volunteered. I didn't know exactly what. You're frustrating. Be quiet and learn an ancient duty that has no place in today's universe." As soon as he said that, Alden became focused in a completely unfamiliar way. The room around them blurred into random colors so that he couldn't make out any of the details save for himself, Kibby, and Gordon. "My people practiced magic, though not in a form you would be familiar with," said Gordon, pacing around Kibby and tilting his head from side to side as if he were trying to examine her from different angles. Humanity would see us as primitive in almost every way. But I think our understanding of life was so different that it's difficult to make a real comparison. For us, power was a thing that came only through sacrifice. He stopped walking and stared at Alden. A few among us were chosen to measure and spend souls in order to aid them in the fulfillment of their true will, he said. That is how my teacher described it to me. And I feel like I should describe it to you in that way first. It was a position of great meaning to my kind, and it was one that I always looked down on. And now that I am alone, I wish I had at least pretended not to. Alden didn't know what the respectful thing to say was, so he just nodded. Anyway, in more technical terms, the right you just triggered by drinking the girl's blood allows us to intermediate between a person and their own magical potential. Most of my people could not control the power they held, so those like me enabled them to use it. They came to us, we read their needs and desires, and gave them what they wanted if it was possible and fell within our very strict notions of what constituted a proper miracle. Basically, I was the village wishing well. That was not at all what Alden had been expecting. So, you granted wishes. Just like that? Not that simple. It required a lot of training. Come look into the girl's eyes and see. If you can see. I'm not entirely sure what I transferred to you, or how it's been modified by the fact that you're not the right species. You don't know what you did to me? Alden said, surprised. I know what I meant to do. But you wouldn't even have noticed I'd enhanced you if it had gone exactly as I intended. Alden had more questions, but Kibby came first. I just have to stare into her eyes? He leaned forward and peered into them. Nothing's happening. Here, said Gorgon. Let me give you a push. All of a sudden, Alden was immersed in a sea of deep emotions and desperate wants that didn't belong to him. He was so scared. He missed them. The chaos kept trying to take him away from himself. He was tired. He didn't want to die. He missed them so much, and it was his fault that they were gone. The guilt was crushing. He wanted them back. He'd give anything to have them back. Anything. Anything. That kind of desire is common, Gorgon's voice said from a long way away. Nobody has enough strength to raise the long dead, though. Focus on the feeling for a moment. It will help you both to move past it. Alden couldn't quit focusing on it. Gorgon's voice had helped him to separate himself enough from the yearning to finally realize that no part of it was his. It was entirely Kibby's longing to have her father and sister back. But he was still drawn to the overwhelming power of the emotion. He examined it. Closer. Closer. As if he had finally given it permission to do what it had always wanted, the gremlin in Alden's brain took over. Something was weighed just beyond the limits of his understanding. Some part of him looked even deeper. No, it said firmly. Not that. There was not enough of Kibby to pay for that. She would end. It was fine for her to end, but it was unacceptable for the end to buy her nothing in return. Spending her in this way would create a perpetual unevenness. It was not allowed. Of course I can't bring her family back. But can't I do something to make her stronger? Alden asked desperately. Strong enough to survive until help comes. No. Try it. Focus on her exhaustion, on the way she is under assault from the environment you found yourself in. You'll see. Alden focused. The gremlin did too. It became confused. Flawed? It said, much more tentatively than it had when it was nitpicking Joe's private contract to death. I don't understand. And it, the thing in my brain, doesn't understand. That's because a successful right requires the destruction of the very resource you're aware you need to enhance. On top of that, they think your alignment with the supplicant's will might be flawed. They care a great deal about making sure you understand her. I am a little glad I passed that part on to you. It's quite helpful even today. But they won't allow the right to take place if you can't come to an accord. Alden frowned. He didn't look away from Kibby's eyes. He could feel a profound rejection from her at the word destruction. Some part of her was aware of what Gorgon had said. The right destroys authority? Sacrifice for power, said Gorgon simply. As I said, a disappointing first experience for you. It was an expensive method of performing magic in more ways than one. And it has little use in the present we both live in. Take me somewhere better now. What? I have been chained to a desk for years. Literally. I want to see something other than Entertainment Kitchen. Wait, Gorgon. This can't be all there is. Isn't there something else we could? All of a sudden the two of them were sitting side by side in familiar blue plastic seats. Buildings slid past the windows. So this is the L, said Gorgon, turning and pressing his face to the glass. I have never written it. Kibby. Alden leaped up. Where did she? The girl is exactly where you left her. Right beside you in the kitchen. It's only been 2 or 3 minutes. And I think I can only afford a couple more. Why is this your favorite memory of the L? Oh. Was it? Alden wasn't sure how he would even know what his favorite memory of public transport was without a lot of thought. But then he spotted a box on the seat across from him, and he realized it was true. I didn't like lunch at school that day, he said. And Aunt Connie was in a party-all-night phase, so I knew there wasn't going to be anything but cereal for dinner at home. The woman who got off the train at the last stop accidentally left behind an entire pizza. Gorgon's posture brightened. He stood and grabbed the box. Then he took a slice so hot the cheese strung almost a foot when he tried to separate it from its fellows, and shoved it into his mouth. He thrust the box toward Alden. Can't I do anything to help her? Alden demanded. Gorgon was chewing like he fully intended to finish off the piece and several more in addition before time ran out. He gulped down a quantity of pizza that would have choked a human, and said, not with the right. And I'm going to ask you not to do this again, please, unless both of our circumstances become much different than they are now. I have a feeling the price of this unexpected mental field trip is going to be very high for me. Also, if you'd done this with a wizard with real power and experience, they wouldn't have been pulled under into the pleasant mental state the child is enjoying right now. They would be quite aware that they were being deeply accessed. Gorgon waved the pizza box at him again. It smelled heavenly. Sighing, Alden took a piece and bit into it. Even as upset as he was, he had to hold back a moan. The pizza tasted exactly as good as it had been that day. Sorry, he said after he swallowed. I mean, if I've caused you trouble by doing this. Gorgon shrugged and shoved another slice into his mouth. Sorry for accidentally depriving you of food options, he said around a mouthful. That part of the gift can't handle being away from our home world. At all. They have no knowledge of other planets and are afraid anything related to an animal they don't recognize might have a soul. It is very inconvenient. No problem. They? Did the gremlin have a brother? Oh, that's right. You think of them as singular. In their proper form they are part instinct, part combined ancestral knowledge from all who have come before you. However, their function is supposed to be enhanced, modernized, and heavily guided by the spirit of your immediate predecessor. It would have helped you a great deal, since I actually understand that drinking a glass of milk won't initiate a sacred and intimate bond between you and the cow. But I didn't want to die and join them, so. Alden shook his head. You made the right call. 100%. Vegetables are great. Especially since passing on the full benefits package involved the successor eating a body in a death cave. Alden would not be doing that. He didn't care how magnificent his gremlin's missing features were. The Greem, they seem to think I can eat anyone who entrusts themselves to my skill. That would only make sense if they believed the people in question were willingly giving their lives over to you. Were they knowingly rendering themselves helpless and placing themselves within your power? Alden stared down at the chunky tomato sauce on top of his pizza. I never really thought of it that way. But, yeah. I guess they were. He hadn't considered how it must feel to another person to entrust themselves. It had to be a little scary to let a stranger have total control over what happened to you in that way. Like being anesthetized before surgery. Only Alden wasn't a doctor surrounded by a bunch of other professionals. He was just some alien teenager with a creepy outfit. Wait. If that's how it judges food, how did you eat the fly? Did it give itself to you? Asking the critical questions in our last few seconds together, are we? Gorgon said dryly. If I hold them in my mouth long enough, they eventually fly or crawl far enough down my throat on their own for my digestive juices to dissolve them. Okay. It was bothering me. You could have swatted it instead of having a religious experience with it. His four nostrils flared. I just said, didn't I? The right won't trigger for a fly. Maybe for some earth animals. Not sure. To be honest, I have some concerns about octopuses. But most of your wildlife should be comestible. I'm trying to teach them that. One stolen bite at a time. My restrictions are making it a slow process. Alden took another bite of his pizza. I've taught it that word chains aren't evil. Mostly. Well, it works for the minor ones now. Oh dear, Gorgon sounded amused. What I gave you is quite limited. Word chain debt would resemble a trigger for one aspect of the ancient duties, but not that closely. They should be able to tell the chain users aren't. He blinked. The semi-transparent eyelids looked just as strange as they always had. I can't hold the connection. Alden, your friends are fine. Bo and Jeremy? His stomach clenched. It had been so long. He tried not to think much about what everyone at home must assume. They are both fine, Gorgon said hastily. His eyes were fixed on the city like he was trying to drink in the sight of it. Remember not to do this to me again. I hope you make it. The inheritance will help you with the chaos at least. Even though I didn't intend for it to be like this, I am glad you. Alden was back in the kitchen. One of his hands was resting on a table, and the painted logogram beneath it was still wet. It took a second for him to collect himself, and when he did, he looked down at Kibby. She was blinking up at him expectantly. Is it working? She asked. It isn't, he said, peeling his palm away from the paint. I'm sorry. We'll just have to go on to plan 2. She sighed and stood. You don't look as disappointed as I expected. I feel nice, she replied. Like I had a good dream. Chapter 52. Alden and Kibby had decided that Plan 2 wouldn't commence until Munthagund's current night was almost at an end. They had about 11 days. It was too long to wait, and at the same time, they had so much to do to prepare that it felt like no time at all. Take me with you, Kibby demanded as Alden put the last few pieces of equipment into a backpack he'd found in one of the closets. I told you why I'm not going to do that. He hefted the backpack. It weighed about 1.5 kibbies. Because when you die, you expect me to sit in the vault all by myself and die more slowly. That's not it, Alden said as gently as he could. I'm 99% sure I'm not going to die. But I will be testing my movement trait heavily. That means I could make a mistake and exhaust myself too much to keep my preserved items safe. I want to make sure it's only a bunch of supplies and not my learning partner. I would be fine for a little while even if I wasn't in a lab. I know. I believe you when you tell me that. Because lying to me would be very dangerous in this situation, and you know it. But we're still not going to waste your strength on this. Plan 2 might fail. So stay here in the vault and do that research you wanted to do, and save your energy for Plan 3. Kibby was scared to be left alone even for a few hours. Alden understood. He was scared to be leaving her, too. But Plan 3 was the Alden and Kibby travel to safety instead of waiting for it to come to them plan. Also known as the most extremely terrifying plan. And for it to even have the slimmest chance of succeeding, Alden needed to understand what being outside the lab walls was really like. And he felt like he had to at least make an attempt to rescue their one potential mode of transportation. I need you to entrust me with the backpack, he said. You will not be able to use the mover discs without me. Your human brain won't perform the necessary functions. Wow, she was really stretching for excuses now. I promise my human brain works well enough to operate a remote control. Even if it is a complicated one. Entrust me with the backpack, Kibby. It took a few more minutes of conversation, but she finally did it. Alden was relieved. Okay, he said, securing the backpack around himself. He was already wearing the coat. What did we do with the? Kibby lifted up a pair of very odd-looking glasses. She'd made them herself by prying some of the magic lenses out of the awesome binoculars and gluing them onto lab goggles. You could see in the dark with them. It was a fuzzy black and white vision, but it would do. When the magic on them fails, you will lose your way back home. They might not fail. And the lab lights are so bright I'll be able to see them from a very long way away. Kibby nodded. She bit her lip. If you come back I will give you a present. Really? Alden said, smiling at her. What is it? It's something good that you want. Now I'm very curious. Then you should come back fast, she said seriously. Line of asterisks. Leaving the lab behind to walk into the pitch blackness of the chaos steep night was just as much fun as Alden had imagined it would be. He felt like he was slowly drifting away from the real world into an abyss that wanted to get handsy with his essential nature. He was fresh right now and so good at assertive mode that he didn't even have to think about it. His authority just pressed right back on its own. But the pressure never let up. And it would be worse when he got tired. For a while, he went slowly, poking at the ground with a long metal rod he'd taken from the lab. The grass was all dead and rotted away now, except for the random blades that had become thundergrass or started to grow into looping vines. Pretty much everywhere he looked there was just bare, unstable soil. Ugh, this is stupid, he thought as the metal sank a few inches into a random patch. Can I even run on this? Is there any point in trying the car at all? The only thing that made him think that running might be okay was that he had decided his movement trait was based heavily on an extra symbolic understanding of the universe. He hadn't learned nearly as much as he needed to about magic, but by now, he had accepted that it could happen in more than one way. There were alterations in perception that nudged your authority slightly, there were skills that bound and shaped it for specific functions, and there was the actual conscious control that Alden had been learning to exert and love in his lessons with Kibby. And that was just the normalish stuff. There were also the rituals to consider. Alden could drink people's blood and connect to their inner selves. Artonans did all kinds of similar seemingly unfathomable things. It was less a single science and more a set of sciences, arts, and historical arcana passed down from long-dead wizards. Azure Rabbit seemed to coat him in a layer of magic that gave him a boost as he kicked off things with close metaphysical relationships to the soil of the planet he was on. It did not care what he thought the ground was at all. Its own definition seemed to be right at the heart of the trait's design, and it would not budge. Alden could put up with it. It was maybe going to help him out here. I'd better be right, or I'm going to break an ankle and have to crawl back to the lab. Even if the trait had defied his attempts to perceive it into submission, he had gotten stronger control over it, just like he had with "let me take your luggage." But unlike the complicated skill, the trait didn't have much in the way of consciously adjustable settings. It was pretty much just on or off, and he still couldn't activate it unless the skill was in use. He flexed the portion of his authority that had been made into the trait and recalled how confused he'd been a few months ago when he managed it, and then had the uncreepy more personal space feeling he couldn't define. That's funny. It's so clear now that it's just me asserting my authority more strongly. It's hard to remember what it actually felt like before I understood. All right, he said to the fuzzy black and white world around him. Walking seems to work like I thought it would. Let's try running. When he took the first few swift steps, he knew it was the right decision. He kicked off the ground, and it felt almost just like it had on that first run to the lab. Maybe he was leaving trails of shallow holes in his wake, but who cared what the ground behind you looked like? I've always thought the original skill description was terrible. You were lighter on your feet when your skills are in use. Hasn't fitted well at all until now. But even if this isn't actual lightness, it's kind of working out that way for me. If not for the heavy backpack full of equipment he hoped would help him ride the car that he hoped would work, the run would have even been comfortable. The inconvenience of wearing rigged night vision glasses was balanced against the lack of obstacles. With so much of the grass gone, there was nothing but ground for miles and miles ahead of him. He cast aside the metal rod and sprinted. How do I feel? He asked himself with every step. How long could I do this for? How long will my legs hold out, my authority, me? Then he slowed to a jog and asked himself the same questions. Then a walk again. Then another sprint. How long could I travel like this with Kibby? How far can we go? He had to figure it out here and now, because after Plan 2, there was only this. And if Plan 3 failed, they wouldn't survive to make up another line of asterisks. Alden didn't think the car was going to work. Months ago, when he'd abandoned it, he'd assumed he was abandoning it for good. It hadn't been badly damaged by the demon bugs at that point, but he was sure they'd done plenty of work on it in the following weeks. And then the same slow degradation that ate away at things at the lab would have ruined it even more. As soon as he found it, the only noteworthy feature in a nothing-filled landscape, he knew he wasn't wrong. The armored vehicle looked like it had taken a beating. And then a few more beatings on top of it. Parts of it were rusting. It was full of holes. The sections of the windows that weren't broken were all bubbled and hazy, like they'd been made of molten sugar. But he couldn't run this far and then not at least try to turn the thing on. So, being careful not to lose preservation on his backpack by letting its weight rest on something, he pulled himself up the side of the toppled vehicle and dropped down through the same door he'd opened last time he'd been here. Easy, he noted. Laboratory parkour had done him some favors. And though he had little idea what the nutritional content of all the alien food he'd been consuming was, he'd at least been focusing on eating things Kibby said were high in protein. He was visibly a little bit fitter when he looked at himself in the mirror and not suffering from any obvious terrible ailments. So it was a complete win in his books. Don't know what the other kids are learning in Avowed School, but I can feed myself on the triplanets. And talk to people. That's got to count for something. Hey, he said quietly to what was left of the bodies in the car as he maneuvered himself into position to start up the vehicle. Your daughter's alive. She's smart and brave. Your big sister's okay. She misses you. Kibby had told him which button and lever combo should power up the car. He pressed and pulled. He was already thinking about the run back to the lab after this avenue was closed off for good, but to his absolute amazement, the car came to life with a deep, airy womb sound that reminded him of no other engine he'd ever heard. Whatever wizard or white made you for Joe deserves a freaking raise, Alden said, staring at the runes glowing against the ceiling with astonishment. There were only a few of them left instead of the plethora there had once been. And it was pretty clear that, at least when it was offline, the car hadn't been offering much in the way of chaos protection. He could tell just from the state of the bodies. They didn't really look like bodies anymore. Too degraded. Some of the bones were warped or gone. One of the vining blades of grass had crawled through the hole in the roof and wrapped around them. Don't overthink it. He turned the car back off and climbed out. Just because it had power, that didn't mean it would run. And he still had to get it back on its metal tires, which was an iffy prospect despite what he told Kibby. Then, it had to get across the hazardous ground back to the lab. No chance it would all come together. Alden took the mover discs and the remote control out of the backpack while it wasn't preserved and then put it back on. The discs couldn't be added back and re-preserved after he used them for this, but the backpack didn't lose its status as his entrusted object just because he'd removed its contents. Very convenient. Mover discs looked like big silver hockey pucks. One side of them stuck onto the object you wanted to move and you used a remote control the size of a textbook to direct the things to levitate or shift in different directions. Bigger objects took more discs. The lab had hundreds of them, but they must have been unusually delicate because they were almost all dead. Kibby had looked up a manual for them on the television and done math and said Alden would need 22 to move the car. He hit 18. It would have to be enough. He removed all the weight from the car he could, including the bodies. He did his best not to touch the vining grass that seemed like it might be in one of the chaos-spreading categories of demon things. He positioned the hockey pucks where he could, in places that looked the least damaged. When he got them all situated to his satisfaction, he started adjusting each individually with the remote control. It was fiddly, especially since the numbers on the display that showed lift angle, direction, and power were in Dartonan. But he had practiced on stuff at the lab. He wasn't so hopeless he couldn't figure it out. Your human brain won't perform the necessary functions. He snorted. Last month, he'd said his first English word in ages aloud by accident, and she'd acted shocked. She claimed she'd thought he was gradually sacrificing his native vocabulary to make room for atonin. They'd had a talk about how lacking two streams of consciousness didn't affect his memory storage. I hope she was just being funny mean. I think she was. He finished setting each disk to move in the way he thought would be best, then he activated them. Popping, creaking sounds came from the car. Not working, Alden thought. He wasn't surprised enough to feel even a little bit of disappointment. Well, it was worth a try. He jumped and stumbled back as the car righted itself with a thud that shook the ground. Oh. Alden stared at it. He looked down at the remote and switched the mover discs off. Now what? Kibby had been adamant that her father and sister would be completely gone. She'd said it in a way that made Alden think she didn't want to deal with the bodies. So he wouldn't try to take them along. He cleaned out the backseat thoroughly, trying to make sure there were as few horrible reminders there as possible. Not that the car itself wasn't a huge one. Under a seat, he found the toy Rhea single-quote model Kibby's sister had been holding when she died. He tried not to remember the little girl the way she looked that day, but he could. He always could when he thought about it. It was one of those memories that didn't fade. One of the Rhea single-quote's wings was gone now. Its scales weren't looking so great. But it was still in the same poised-to-fly pose Alden had chosen for it 6 months ago. He held it gently on his palm, examining it through the night vision lenses. I don't know how we got to a place like this, he said. But at least we're still somewhere, right? He stuck it in the pocket of his failing lab coat. Kibby could have it if she changed her mind about mementos. Or he'd keep it himself. Rhea single-quotes held up against the chaos for this long deserved a trip to a better place. He climbed into the driver's seat and buckled the harness. You're not actually going to go, are you? He asked the car. The ground is a mess out there. One more deepish bad patch like this one, and you'll just give up again. Kibby swore there wouldn't be anything like a bottomless pit for them to fall into. Most of the soil would only cave a few inches, which the car could handle. The worst patches should be like the one that had caused this rollover. Just 2 or 3 feet deep. But there would still be plenty of those. And one of the mover discs had died just from this flip. It had fallen onto the dirt before the car was even righted. Alden didn't think the others were likely to give him another full lift. Don't you dare make me trust you for no reason, he said to the car. Then he pushed the logogram for home. And they started rolling. Chapter 53. Alden kept waiting for something to go wrong. But for the first time in months, nothing did. The car climbed in and out of larger depressions, and it spun its wheels in patches of loose soil a couple of times, but it made it all the way back to the lab when it arrived. The ramp to the underground entrance even opened for it. Kibby was waiting for him. It works, she said, sounding stunned as he climbed from the vehicle. I know. I can't believe it either. Also, you're supposed to be in the vault. You were gone a long time. He hadn't been. It had been almost the shortest possible amount of time the trip could have taken. I was worried about you, too. Vault. Now. I'll be right there after I shower. Did showering do anything to remove excess chaos residue? Probably not. But it made him feel like he was being proactive. When he rejoined Kibby, he found she had set up their learning cushions side by side in front of one of the screens. I thought you didn't want to practice anymore, Alden said. Wasn't it making things worse instead of better for you? I am not practicing. I'm teaching. This is your present for returning safely. Alden held back a sigh. He wanted sleep far more than he wanted a class right now, but he wasn't about to admit it. He was already barefoot like a proper student, so he walked over to join her. Just before he was about to kneel down, he spotted something unfamiliar on his mat. It was a loop of iridescent white string, meticulously coiled into the logogram for friend. Like you used to do with my marlick berries, Kibby said, pointing at it. I remember. Alden stared at the string. He knew immediately that it was a magic item because his brain was a little hung up on it. sympathy for magic being weird again. He had mostly gotten used to the effect that particular stat increase had on him, and lately it was rarer for something to draw his attention to it so noticeably that it became a distraction. "Kibby, is this? It's for you. It's an Oriot." Kibby used the word Alden had learned just a couple of days before when he asked about the spell instructor Gwenlor had erased from the screen before starting her class. "Distinguished Master Rodin gave it to me with the cushions. It was inside mine so it would be safe until I was ready to bond with it. But I haven't passed the right test for instructor Gwenlor to send my beginner Oriot lessons, yet. I have to learn all the hand-casting spells she teaches first." Kibby examined his fingers. "You should take off the ring before you hold it." Crouching, Alden slipped the ring off and set it aside on the floor. He lifted the string carefully and knelt on the cushion. The Oriot was fascinating. It flowed through his fingers so smoothly it was almost like it was made of liquid. "Kibby, you don't have to give me this," he said. "It's so kind of you, but I know the things Joe, Distinguished Master Rodin, gave you are important to you." "Someone will give me another one," she replied, eyes fixed on the string. "Maybe even Distinguished Master Rodin will do it, when I finally get to call Instructor Gwenlor and tell her I finished her lessons. Or someone else will when I go to school. But maybe nobody will ever give you one. Maybe they don't have them on Earth." "I've never seen one there before," Alden said. "Since I'm your instructor, I'll give you one." She spoke firmly. "And you will use it your whole entire life and be the best avowed." He smiled at her. "You said it's a tool that bonds to authority? After you start using it, it does. Then it's only yours. You have to take good care of it and keep it with you all the time, and it will get stronger so that you can cast better spells with it." So Gilnor wasn't just wearing one in her hair as a fashion statement that day by the pond. "You're supposed to keep them close. We only have one Oriot spell, so you will have to try very hard and learn it," Kibby said in a businesslike tone. "I will pause the video just before Instructor Gwenlor clears the spell from the screen, and you will study the casting shapes while I read all the logograms to you. Do we even know what that spell does? Or if all of it is listed on the board? It's all there. It hits things. It hits them?" She meant punching something with a small fist. "It does that. But farther away. And harder. And in a square shape. It's the graduation spell at Instructor Gwenlor's school. For the year 6s. It says congratulations on the board beside it and lists all the students' names and their second schools. The tiny children Alden and Kibby had been learning with up until now were the year 1s, and going by the length of Mother Planet years and the wear tone and kids aged. That was probably the human equivalent of a 10 or 11-year-old. So it was like an elementary school graduation spell. "You only have a few days to learn," Kibby said. "You have to listen and remember everything I say." "I will," Alden agreed. "Thank you so much for the present. It's perfect." He couldn't help feeling a little excited. And nervous. What if something like the Oriot wouldn't work for an avowed, and the gift was wasted on him? She turned on the screen, and their lesson began. Line of asterisks. The Oriot lesson became Alden's main free-time distraction now that they were committed to only leaving the vault for a plan-related prep work and other essentials. Kibby read the instructions to him over and over until he could nearly recite them from memory, and then he spent ages sitting on his cushion working out how to use the loop of string. It was a mix of making the necessary shape sets with the Oriot and manipulating his authority to touch the gaps created by each shape. Like a complicated version of the partner greeting exercise the students learned to start with. Alden couldn't usually feel solid objects with his authority when he wasn't actively using his skill on them. It had never even occurred to him to try. But the Oriot invited him to do it. Kibby had called it sticky, and that was a fine word for it. He wanted to touch it, and as he worked with it more and more over the passing days, it started to feel like an actual extension of himself. And on the third day of practice, there was another development. "It's not white anymore," Alden said, surprised. He held up the final shape in the set that formed the spell, a lacework of string with a square at the center, to show it to Kibby. She was bundled in the coat again, reading lab files on the tablet. She'd been at it for ages. She was taking her role in Plan 2 seriously. Which was good, since Alden didn't have a prayer of reading the kind of highly technical writing she was going through. He was lucky to pick out the occasional common noun or adjective. She glanced up. "That's good," she said. The Oreata turned a very pale shade of blue. "It means you've almost finished bonding with it. It changes colors when you're done? It turns your favorite color." Alden stared at the silky string. "I guess I do like blue. You should be careful where you aim when you do the final shape from now on," she warned him. "You might be able to cast with it now that you're bonding. You could hit stuff." Alden grinned. "I want to hit stuff." She sighed. "When I learn to hit stuff, I'm going to go squash the evil vine that's escaped from the greenhouse. It's not supposed to be a fighting spell. It's just to learn aiming and knock things over. I bet it can fight a plant." She considered it. "Probably," she agreed. "And I bet I get it right next time," he said, unclenching his authority and letting the string fall from his fingers. He was wrong. It took him 2 more days of obsessive attention to fully bond with the Oreata. But when it was over, it was less like he'd gotten the hang of using a new toy and more like he'd gained a third hand that he was still a little clumsy with. The Oreata turned a deep shade of indigo blue, and it retained a faintly iridescent quality. As he worked with it, it had started to feel more liquid than ever, but it had also begun to develop a habit of sticking and catching sometimes when he needed it to do so. Alden was stupidly in love with his loop of string. Maybe he was supposed to be. The idea of handing it over to someone else to use or even hold actually gave him a physical sense of discomfort. Last night, he'd had a dream that something had broken his Oreata, and he'd woken up in a cold sweat to pester Kibby with 50 different questions about how to take proper care of it. She was not nearly as concerned about what a terrible thing it would be if the Oreata broke as she should have been. Of course getting wet won't hurt it. What about knives? Or fire? I guess a hot enough fire. Or a powerful enough knife. Really? He said, clutching the string to his chest. How do I make it stronger? She looked at him oddly. It's as strong as your authority is. It's protected by you. That's how it works. He finally fell back onto his pillow with a relieved sigh. I guess it's true, Kibby said in a fascinated tone. I always heard wizards were like this about their Oreatas, but since I don't have one yet. Does every wizard have one? I think I've seen images of them with strings a few times and never thought about it. But in person, I've only seen the girl at Leaf Song with one. A lot of wizards have them. Not all. People who don't love to hand cast usually have theirs severed after they finish training with it in school so that it's not as much trouble for them. Alden rolled over to gape at her in horror. You probably saw people with them and didn't realize, she added. Most wizards wear them under their clothes, and some use them as dasher necklaces. Bracelets maybe. Or hair ties like Jalnor. Wizards did tend to be thoroughly kitted out with the elaborate clothes, magic jewelry, tats, and other tools of the trade. It would be easy to overlook a piece of string or just dismiss it as another weird Artonan thing. It's rude to touch someone else's without permission, Kibby informed him. Of course it is, Alden said. What kind of animal would do such a thing? Kibby shook her head at him in exasperation and went back to her tablet. You'll see, he said, petting his Oreata. When you get yours, you'll see. I am happy you like your present. Go to sleep. I'm studying physics and chemistry and magic generators. Line of asterisks. Night turned into a gray dawn. It wasn't light enough to be called day, but it was light enough for them to see. And that meant it was time. For everything else. Human Day 186 was the time they'd both agreed on. It was dark still, but not so dark that they couldn't see. Their sleep cycles were almost properly synced for the plan thanks to the simple expedient of Alden spending several hours carrying Kibby around strapped to his back on day 185. He'd been doing it as often as she'd let him lately anyway. It wore him out faster, pushing him into the askew state almost as soon as he picked her up, but he wished she would have let him do it a few more times. It wasn't like she recovered when she was being held, but it stretched their window. Over the past few days, everything had been completed. The car was packed with the items they had deemed worth the wait. Ever since he had returned with it, it had been parked inside a plain-looking metal garage that was theoretically capable of giving it some kind of magical boost. And Alden had finally memorized the function of every logogram on the vehicle's control panel. For her part, Kibby had prepped the main lab by arranging all sorts of volatile equipment, chemicals, and supplies in the way she deemed best after her days of research. Plan 2, Alden said that morning as they shared a breakfast of freeze-dried food in the vault. Plan 2, Kibby agreed. She was looking strained already, Alden noted. Usually a night's sleep under the coat helped at least a little. We blow the whole place up, he said. Yapal Corporation, she replied, her face set. They are not getting a piece. They can shove the ashes up there, dash. Alden blinked. Wow. She must have learned her serious swearing from Joe. The professor's magic bomb had come with instructions for Thenar. It was supposed to be used in conjunction with a second one. According to Kibby, it was not designed to make a gigantic boom that would destroy everything, but to neatly demolish just a couple of key areas in a way that would look like it could have been an accident. She didn't approve. Alden had asked her if she could figure out how to make a bigger magical explosion. Maybe some smoke and fire. Anything that might draw the attention of the people who had come to Thagunt to clear the chaos. She didn't think that was enough either. And she was the one who could read the instructions. She was the one who'd been hurt the most. So, full-scale devastation it was. They watched a soap opera. Klepak and the Purple Daisies again. Then they both ate and drank as much as they could stand, and they headed out. Before they exited the main lab, Alden examined Kibby's handiwork. He couldn't understand most of it, but in addition to all the stuff she'd arranged herself, she'd had him dolly in some heavy plastic drums and random pieces of still functional enchanted equipment for her. The bomb, still in its protective case, looked like a glass football full of swirling silver mist with 3 deep depressions in the top. Kibby had set it right at the edge of one of the floor tiles she had told Alden he must never, ever touch. She bent over it. "You're sure?" he asked. "I will not die in the vault like a grasshopper." She stuck her 3 middle fingers into the depressions and held them there for a while. Then, she removed them. "We have a human hour and 14-hour fractions now. 74 minutes. To calm his nerves, he ran his fingers over the aureate. He was wearing it around his neck, triple-looped and easy to hide under the collar of one of his turtlenecks or the Hawaiian shirt he was wearing over them. They headed across the chilly compound as they had so many times before. Kibby hopped over the evil vine without looking at it, but Alden had to pause and admire his handiwork. His new spell had squashed it nicely, and he'd been able to practice his aim. It hit things with a perfectly square-shaped hammer of force. Approximately 16 inches across on the diagonal. They weren't crushing blows, but they were certainly harder than Alden could physically punch or kick. And if they didn't hit anything, they traveled pretty far before they faded. He'd been able to throw up piles of gravel from about 30 yards away. They entered the garage and climbed into the car. Alden took the driver's seat and pressed the buttons that would take them to the coordinates marked on the homemade map they'd glued to the car's ceiling. If nobody came to check on the explosion, the map was Plan 3. Please, somebody come, he thought. Plan 3 is the worst. The car started and began to roll. To cover his sigh of relief, he smiled at Kibby. "We need driving music." She winced. "Do not sing, Alden. You are not good at it." Chapter 54. "I think you should press the button that makes it go faster," Kibby said suddenly from her place in the passenger seat. She was bundled up in the coat, with an additional pair of blankets wrapped around her to ward off the cold, and she had her tablet in her lap. While the lab still existed, she was using it to study the chaos map one last time. Whoever was in charge of cleanup was making slow and steady progress toward them, taking one giant semicircular bite out of the corruption every day like they were eating their way to the center of a pizza. It really wasn't what he would have expected, if he'd bothered to expect anything over the course of the past few months. Something that slowly drained the chaos away from the entire map would have felt more right. So that everything turned from red to the better colors, purple and pink, and then gradually disappeared. But there was no gradual fading involved in whatever the wizards were doing. The corruption was just totally gone from the clean area. "Faster?" he asked. "I thought we agreed we liked this speed?" They had debated their travel pace for a long time. Fast had the advantage of getting them to safety quicker, and time was very much of the essence. Slower had the advantage of reducing the risk of a devastating rollover like the one that had occurred before. Even at lower speeds, the car was still much faster than running. And it had proven it could actually handle the shitty terrain by grinding slowly through loose soil and climbing out of most ditches. "Maybe I should not have asked you to add the litter and generators to the main lab yesterday. I felt very angry, though," Kibby said. Alden turned around in his seat to stare out of the warped and hazy back windshield. They'd been driving for half an hour. The lab was far behind them already, and he couldn't really mark its position anymore. Maybe that pale patch on the gray horizon was from the lights? "We're pretty far away," he said. "Didn't we agree we should be at least in the general area to make it easier for people coming to rescue us to find? We should be farther." "Okay." No arguing with the bomb maker about the bomb she had made. Alden pressed the button that increased their speed, and the quiet thrumming sound of the car rose. It was difficult to make sense of how fast they were going when their only landmarks were potholes, but the whistle of the wind through the holes in the windows and roof of the vehicle grew louder. "Hey, you've never been to another planet, right?" Alden asked. Kibby shook her head. "I think you're going to like the rest of the universe. If you're on Ortona 3, near the university with Distinguished Master Roden and the others, there are all kinds of plants and animals, way more than here. And you can see the stars at night. And if you end up going to Instructor Gwenlore's school on the Mother, I bet it's just as nice. What about Earth? If you find a way to visit me on Earth, I'll take you to the ocean. Munthagund didn't have any very large bodies of water. I'll let you hold my cat, Victor." "The mean one?" "Yes. I will find a way. I will become an ambassador if I have to." "You'd be the best ambassador." "That would take a long time, though. I will summon you before then. As soon as I earn my rights. And we will tattoo our faces. That'll be the best day ever." Alden really meant it, too. With a few minutes to go, they finally stopped the car. They both climbed out, and Kibby stood staring behind them with narrowed eyes, as if she thought it might help her see the laboratory miles away. Alden hauled a couple of small red spotlights out of the back seats and positioned them at the front and back. They were assuming that if wizards and spaceships wanted to fly over here and take a closer look at the situation, they would be able to locate the vehicle easily enough, even though they were now quite far from the facility. They were wizards. In spaceships. It kind of implied competence on multiple levels. But he figured the lights couldn't hurt. The tablet Kibby had brought was lying on the seat in the car. Out of the corner of his eye, Alden suddenly saw the image of the chaos map vanish from it. He spun to look back toward the lab. That was just the bomb starting to. The main explosion hasn't happened yet. They stood in silence for another few seconds, then Kibby said, "Now. It's gone." An instant later, a green-white flash lit the sky. The perpetual cloud cover was thrown into sharp relief. The whole landscape brightened. Kibby threw back the hood of the lab coat to take it all in. The light vanished, and a few seconds later, a single clear sharp bang, like the discharge of an enormous gun, split the air. It was followed by a deep, growling roar that Alden could actually feel. And then there was silence. Kibby turned to beam at him. That was great," he said, heart thundering in his chest. "It was the most impressive explosion I've ever seen." He assumed the crater the lab had been built in was now large enough to warrant its own zip code. He wondered what level of crime blowing an actual chunk out of an Ortonan moon was. "You're sure we can convince people this was an accident?" "There won't be anything left for them to prove otherwise," Kibby said unconcernedly. "Maybe a demon strike damaged and altered the wrong thing. I'm pretty sure I saw a demon sneaking around near the lab last night." "Me too. One of the big ones. It's why we left in the car. We had to run." Demons are dangerous. They are. Line of asterisks. The next part of Plan 2 involved waiting. Alden didn't like it because he wasn't sure it was the right thing. Maybe they should have decided to keep driving and trust that space wizards who were looking would find them no matter how far they got from the lab, or maybe they should have parked a little closer to start with. Or maybe. Forget it, he chided himself, walking in a slow circle around the car in his coat while he wore a preserved kidney strapped to him like a backpack. This is what you decided on. It was a horrible day. The chaos ate away at him. He asserted his authority and pressed it back. Over and over again. He adjusted the spotlights 1,000 times, as if wiggling them into different positions was going to make help drop down from the clouds on top of him. He ate and drank as much as he wanted from their supplies and went over the plan until he was almost crazy from it. Help would come. If it didn't come, they would race toward it. As fast and hard as they could. The car moved faster than the approaching aid. When he and Kibby did the math together, it looked like there was a chance. If the car lasted only a single day, traveling at an average speed of around 30 miles per hour in human terms, they would probably die. If the car lasted 2 days. Maybe. A tiny maybe. A gossamer thin sliver of a maybe. Based on the speed of the approaching help, the speed of the car, the speed at which Alden himself could jog, his own total guess about how long it would be before he tipped over the same threshold Kibby had and could no longer recover effectively from the assault. And then there was Kibby. She had to last, too. She had to last at least 2 days without the protection of the lab, too. With nothing but whatever help the coat could give her. Or they wouldn't be able to take the car. Alden wouldn't be able to protect her with his skill if he wasn't carrying her. He adjusted the lights again. It had been hours. There were no ships in the sky. No vehicles on the dark horizon. What kind of people don't care enough to come see what that giant-ass boom was? He muttered. There's no way they didn't notice it. Some sensor on some piece of equipment somewhere had to have notified somebody. That green flash had to be visible from space. Even if they thought it was just a crazy accident at a crazy scientist's long-abandoned lab, weren't they even a little curious? It was awesome, Kibby, he said to his frozen companion. They should want to come check it out. Alden's faithful clock, brought with him from the vault, finally died to the chaos after about 9 hours. From here on out, he'd just be guessing at the days unless he asked Kibby. She had a better natural time sense. He trudged the circular path around the car, staring down at his shoes. They were the same ones he had been wearing when he was summoned away from the consulate. Just a regular pair of sneakers he had bought on sale more than a year ago. They were the only shoes at the lab that fit his feet, so he'd just kept wearing them whenever he couldn't go barefoot. They were held together by so much industrial-strength glue, magic tape, and scraps at this point that they looked almost like he'd made them from scratch. He stumbled suddenly and almost fell. Ah, it's hard out here. I feel less and less like me. He ran his fingers over his workout. He tried to focus on the strength of the machine that was his activated skill and ignore the shredding, creeping pain of the Escunas digging into his authority. I think the free authority is almost the same size as the skill now. The magnitude of his power was something Alden was only just learning how to sense. He wondered if he'd be able to feel it still when he was back home. Or if, without the pressure of the chaos, it would all just leave him. He didn't think it would. It felt so natural now. Whether he was relishing in the feeling of casting spells with it or feeling the pressures against it as it helped him endure this environment, he couldn't imagine life without it. Finally, he'd had enough. His energy was spent. And he'd admitted to himself that no help was coming for them here. He stopped and set Kibby down. She was just as awake and alert as she had been when he started carrying her. Her face was still flush with the excitement of her successful act of vengeance. She examined him as he pulled off the coat and gave it to her. Nobody came? Plan 3, said Alden tiredly. Remember your promise. I remember. We are partners. I will tell you when I can't do it anymore. They got back in the car. Kibby took the driver's seat. Alden strapped himself in beside her. Doors or no doors? She asked, pulling back the sleeves of the coat so that her hands were free. You have experienced several hours in the corruption now, so you choose. I don't think the car's offering any protection at all anymore, he said. Figuring out once and for all whether the armored vehicle was still doing anything to help shield them from the chaos had been part of his assignment today. But he felt exactly the same now as he had been outside. It's just good for moving us. So let's make it move better. Kibby nodded and started going through a long sequence of button presses and lever pulls she had found last week when she managed to get one of the lab tablets to talk to the car. When she was finished, there was the squeal of metal on metal and 4 loud clangs. The car's heavy armored doors fell to the ground with thuds. Alden stared out across the empty landscape. Then, he took his broken clock and chucked it into the dirt. Do you have your sleeping supplies? Kibby asked. Yes. The plan doesn't work if you don't trust me. You have to rest. I know. Look. Alden showed her a set of earplugs he'd been keeping in his pocket, and he pulled a strip of cloth out from under the seat. He wrapped it around his eyes. I'm going straight to sleep. Good, said Kibby. He heard her pressing more buttons. It's my turn to carry you, now. The car started up. Alden resisted the urge to thank it aloud, or to peek out from behind his blindfold. His job was to sleep now and recover. And he was exhausted. Go, Kibby whispered. Metal tires crunched against the soil. Wind filled the stripped car. Alden said peace of mind and shoved his earplugs in. The gremlin was thoroughly trained on it now. It had finally learned to trust that Alden would pay his debts and even himself out without being yelled at. In just a few minutes, despite the bumpy ride, he was asleep. Line of asterisks. Hours later, Alden woke up feeling pretty refreshed physically. He wasn't great existentially, but it wasn't as bad as it had been. Less askew than when he first set Kibby down after their carrying session. I'm still recovering enough to pull ahead of it a little, I guess. 1,000 pet crickets for Gorgon. And one noncommittal nod of acknowledgement for the system. He thought the Uriad was helping somehow, too. He hadn't really expected any significant recovery at all while he was out here away from the vault. In a way, the Uriad's very existence seemed to be passively bolstering his authority. Did you just wake up and pet your Uriad before you even said hello to me? Alden lifted his eye mask and turned to face his chauffeur. She had her knees pulled up against her chest, and not so much as a finger was sticking out from the coat and blankets while she watched for hazards on the route ahead of them. The red leather was covered in crumbs, though, so she'd obviously been snacking. How are we doing? You slept for 10 or 11 of your hours. The car successfully climbed in and out of 3 large ditches. I chose to maneuver around 2 more. No ships flew over. I decreased our speed because of the ditches, and then I changed my mind and increased it. You should eat and drink and pee. That's all good. Except for the ships. And I can remember to do those last 3 things on my own. I promise. He unhooked his safety harness and reached behind him to dig into his box of chosen road food. After biting into a leathery nutrition block that tasted vaguely like cantaloupe, he examined Kibby more closely. It was impossible to tell how she was doing. He couldn't even see her face without leaning over to peer into the hood. Are you all right? He asked. Seriously? She didn't answer for a minute, and his stomach clenched. Finally, she said, I feel bad. But not so bad that we should stop the car. I feel better than I expected. So if you want to, we can. Not yet. Regular sleep? He asked. I can watch the ground. I'm not sleepy yet. But you watch for a while. Tell me if I need to do anything. Alden watched. This was the reason they hadn't left in the full dark. You had to be able to see the ground well enough to avoid the worst obstacles. But even now, in the dim light, there wasn't much to it. He just stared straight ahead, reminded himself periodically not to lose focus, and made sure the car didn't encounter something it couldn't handle. Kibby used the break he was giving her to crack open her last tin of canned meat and eat it with a spoon. He couldn't help but notice that she wasn't making the happy smacking sounds she usually did when she was eating the stuff. Alden had been saving up one particular conversation topic for exactly this sort of situation. "The primary," he said. Kibby's spoon stopped clinking against the can, and he smiled. "What about the primary?" she asked suspiciously. "I know I'm always teasing you about the things he said to me when I met him at that party," said Alden. "The truth is he didn't say much. He certainly didn't say I was amazing or any of the other stuff I told you. He mostly asked me questions about myself." "What questions?" He kept his eyes on the landscape while he told her the whole story, not embellishing anything or leaving out a single detail. She was fascinated, delighted, baffled, and scandalized all at once. She was completely uninterested in his dramatic confessions about his childhood pastime of staring at the dead body of someone he hated, and she was entirely too interested in examining his left hand. "It's been months. I don't think you're going to find the primaries, huh? I still don't know how to say DNA, magic under my fingernails after this long." She finally let his hand go. "I can't believe he really liked you." "Oh." Alden held the hand to his chest. "Also, I don't think he liked me. It felt like... he was okay, actually. Better than a lot of people at that party. And I don't think he was trying to scare me even though he did. But it still felt like a slightly dangerous encounter. He said he wouldn't hurt you. That's a weird thing to say to someone. Also, he told me I should try to grow up well." "You should." "Well, yeah. That's true, but it sounded kind of... he liked you." "You're almost friends," she said in a tone that would brook no argument. "And we are friends. So, it's like the primary and I are almost friends, too. Logical." She nodded. "A lot of people on Munthagund wanted the mother planet to send a knight here. Not the primary, of course. But one of them. To guard against the corruption. Did you want one to come? Is that why you're so interested in them?" Kibby shook her head. "No. I didn't really want one here. Back then. We would have had to leave and go to research somewhere else, maybe somewhere more dangerous, if the mother completely fixed the chaos problem here. It was the people who live in the cities on the other half of the moon that wanted it gone. I would think everyone would want that. The Grand Senate said the Knights couldn't spare anyone for permanent assignment in a place like Thagund. A few years ago, they offered people free, instead. I don't know that word. Moving to a new home. Relocation. I just listened to all the news about the primary and some of the other knights because it was exciting," said Kibby. "Distinguished Master Roden got special reports on them that were supposed to be only for the most important wizards. But he didn't mind if we all watched them, too." "What kinds of things do the knights do?" "All different. But all good things. They fight chaos and demons a lot. Sometimes in places really far away." She took another bite of her meat. "I saw the primary slice a demon in half." "Almost." "Almost?" Alden asked, taking a sip from a bottle of water and sparing a glance away from the windshield to examine her expression. She looked very thoughtful. "I saw the demon in one piece, and then it was in two," she clarified. "I couldn't actually see the primary. He was too small." "Could the guy shrink himself?" It seemed like a strange choice for a fight, even if you were the Triplanet's #1 super wizard. "It was an image from one of our space telescopes," Kibby said. "I asked Master Roden about it, and he said the demon was 1/11th the size of Munthagund." Alden spat water all over the car's control panel. "What?" he sputtered, choking and patting at his Hawaiian shirt. Like there was someone around to care if he was a little damp. "No. No? No. Demons can't be that big." Kibby looked flummoxed. "But I saw it." I mean, I don't want demons to be that big. That's really bad. I don't like it at all." He also did not like it that he had engaged in conversation with a man who could chop something measured in fractions of moons in half. People like that shouldn't hide behind potted plants with their sister at stupid college parties. They should stay in high-budget fantasy movies, where they belonged. I don't like it either. Except for watching the primary fix it. That was fun. She tossed her empty can out of the car. "You can't tell anyone. Master Rodan isn't supposed to share that kind of thing with his assistants. Kibby, I could stand on top of a building and shout that to an entire city on Earth, and I promise nobody would believe me. Line of asterisks. Kibby slept. Alden drove. Kibby drove. Alden slept. They ate and drank as much as they wanted. This was not the kind of trip where you rationed your supplies. They felt worse and worse. They started talking about imaginary futures for themselves. They designed their matching tattoos. More than 40 hours in by her own estimation, Kibby said, I didn't think we'd make it this far. The car wasn't even supposed to drive for this long when everything was normal. She had never once, in all their planning, told him that. I guess having the doors off helps a lot, he said. Maybe I'll forgive it, said Kibby. If it goes a little farther. It was full daylight now. They'd come a long way. Alden forced himself to go to sleep again. He chained for peace of mind. It was his first time ever stacking them without paying back the debt. The gremlin was starting to grumble. Give me time, he begged it. Please. I've never once failed to pay it off. I've never once cheated, and you know that. Just give me a little more time. Kibby woke him up. He wasn't sure how many hours it had been. The car was stopped. There were huge dark circles under her eyes. Her whole body was shaking, and she was breathing too hard. I got it wrong a little, she said faintly. I'm sorry. It's all right. He didn't even know how she had messed up, but whatever it was okay. This was the kind of situation where no mistake she made could be unacceptable. If she turned into a demon the size of a planet and destroyed the universe, Alden would look everyone in the eye when he got to the afterlife and tell them Kibby had done better than any of them could have in the same situation. She showed him a patch of skin on the back of one small hand. It was cracked and bloody and blackening. I got it wrong, she said again. I couldn't push it away anymore. So that's how it's going to get us? He had wondered what would happen when they were finally spent. If it would be similar to the swift deaths of the scientists. If they would just rot away, if they would mutate to death like some of the plants. Guess it doesn't matter. Not a problem, said Alden, unlatching the safety harness. This just means it's my turn. He drank 2 bottles of water. He ate sickeningly sweet jam out of a pouch. He strapped on the pitifully small bag of supplies he'd allotted himself. Checked the lightweight sling they'd designed for the sprinklers. Finally, he took the lab coat from Kibby, put it on, and adjusted the straps around himself that would hold her in place if he stumbled. He crouched down. She stared at him for a few seconds. You remember how my skill works, right? He said with a grin. You're the boss. You've got to do the entrusting. She nodded and positioned herself on his back. He heard the clasps click shut around her. She threw her arms around him. Alden activated the skill when he felt like she was in the position that would be the most balanced and least difficult for him. Her breath, ragged and frightened in his ears, stopped. He started to run. Tobe continued, thanks for listening.